Hey HBs! Usually, this is the podcast where two BFFs do a deep dive into a romance novel and giggle, debate, and go on tangents along the way. However, when the stars align and you get the opportunity to interview Tessa Dare, the Tessa Dare, you tell your to-be-read pile to hold on a damn minute and you set it up. So let's jump right in to my discussion of the Governess Game, how the Dukes stole Christmas, and so much more with the beacon of heart-melting prose and humility through excellence that is Tessa Dare. Here we go. All right. Hi, Tessa.
Hi there.
How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much.
Excellent. I have to just tell you that this is kind of a dream come true for me, if I'm being totally transparent. And I know that's probably awkward for you, but I can't help but fangirl just a tiny bit.
Slightly, but that's, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I find just about everything awkward, so that's okay.
Fair enough. So we are not normally an interview podcast. Normally our format is Aaron and I read a romance novel and then we do a deep dive, like recap and review, basically just have a book club by ourselves and then publish it for other people, if that makes sense. But one of the best things to come out of our podcast has been the community that has sort of sprouted up around us. I'm sure your experience too is like Romancelandia is one of the most supportive and amazing places in the land, world, universe.
Oh, absolutely.
Because of that, a lot of the questions that I have for you today are actually from our listeners.
Right.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
That is.
And then this morning, I listened to your interview on the Wicked Wallflowers Club because we have a little bit of crossover and I wanted to make sure we had new content,
Okay, so we won't go into duck sex.
Well, actually, I am glad you asked, madam. Because the only thing I have to add to your discussion is that it blew my mind when I learned about the forced copulation. First of all, I love the euphemisms that we bring up like all over the place for rape, like whether it's us talking about old school bodice rippers and talking about forced seduction to scientists calling it forced copulation or whatever. I could not believe the female duck vagina has evolved to make sure this doesn't work. Did you know that?
No.
So, okay, get this. I learned this at the Museum of Sex in New York City a while ago because they had a whole exhibit about the sex in the animal kingdom. And boy ducks' penises are in a counterclockwise spiral.
Sure.
So lady duck vaginal canals have evolved to be clockwise and have really sharp turns in them. So unless the lady duck relaxes and wants it to happen, it's almost impossible for the forced copulation to actually take.
Wow.
Isn't that nuts?
That is. But my mind is put at ease to know that every duck reproduction is not a rape. That's really...
Isn't that really nice?
Because I've had this thought, that ducks are just these terrible, violent, rapey creatures. And now, knowing that the female has a measure of consent involved, it's nice to know.
It's a tiny bit comforting, right?
Comforting. That's the word I was looking for.
Kind of defense mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, listener, you really need to check out Tessa's interview on the Wicked Wallflowers Club. You can hear about her Hogwarts house, lobster sex, which Aaron and I were, if you remember, totally intrigued by from When a Scot Ties the Knot, and duck sex and duck rape. It goes everywhere.
This is so very true. I have no idea. Well, we'll just see where we go today.
I mean, right? Yeah. I mean, I have been known to be a bit of a wild card.
All right.
Okay, we're here to talk about the Governess Game in particular.
Awesome.
But you also just had a big announcement. Do you want to tell everybody about that?
Yeah, we just announced the other day that Sarah McLean and I and Sophie Jordan and Joanna Shoup are putting out a Christmas anthology called How the Dukes Stole Christmas. It'll be coming out October 15th. It's available for pre-order now. And we're really excited about it.
Reading all the descriptions and everything. I mean, all four of you are authors that I actually don't need descriptions for. I just hear you have something come out and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to read that. So
awesome. That's exciting. A very big compliment. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right. So the Governess Game, it's book 2 in your series Girl Meets Duke. And this is Alexandra's story with the bookshop rake.
Yes.
Will you tell us about it?
Yes. Well, every book in this Girl Meets Duke series has a meet cute of some sort, which is why, it's called Girl Meets Duke. A meet cute is one of those accidental meetings. They literally sometimes bump into each other, and that's what's happened in Alexandra's life.
Yeah, we got to see that in the Duchess deal.
Yes. So she literally has bumped into a man in a bookshop and she's completely flustered. He's very handsome and charming and they part ways. She assumes she's never going to see him again.
Bless her heart.
Yes. Despite that, she's not able to let go of thinking about him. And I mean, for me, this is very relatable. I think that especially when I was younger, you have a chance encounter or a small interaction with somebody, and then you kind of concoct this whole imaginary relationship from that one incident, even if you know it's ridiculous, which Alexandra does because she's a very practical person. She knows that it's completely irrational. It's never going to happen, but she can't, there's this little bit of her mind that can't let it go. So she thinks, of course, she's never going to see him again. And then she does. They run into one another a second time. This time, not so literally bumping into one another, but she shows up at his house hoping to get business setting his clocks. And that's not a metaphor. She really sets clocks for her living. Yep. And he thinks she's there to interview for governess positions. So they have this back and forth, and she accidentally becomes his governess through a series of various little... I won't go into the entire... But she becomes his governess to his 2 young wards, who he has inherited the guardianship of, Rosamond and Daisy. They're 2 little sisters who have been orphaned and are problematic, to say the least, quirky.
So beautifully almost broken, but they can, they're so wonderful.
So, yeah, Alex agrees to take the job because he offers her a lot of money and she needs money. Mm-hmm. So that's where it goes. And of course, now she's in the same house with this bookshop rake, which is what she referred to him as ever since that chance meeting, because she never knew his name. And she's in the same house with him, this guy that's just tremendously attractive, and he's attracted to her as well.
She realizes that she's been obsessed with him, but she's a little bit perturbed and also irritated with herself that he doesn't remember her.
Yes.
I love that it's sort of a foundational part of her character, at least I think, where she has these really, really high hopes, but then she also has enough sense to sort of bat herself down again. Uh-huh. It's like, oh, he doesn't remember me. Well, of course he doesn't remember you. Why would he?
Right, right. And he's not the perfect guy that she has been imagining ever since that meeting in the bookshop either. She kind of built him up into this very romantic figure, and he's kind of a mess. Kind of a hot mess. Yeah. In various ways. So it's a bit of a letdown. He hasn't thought of her at all. He's not so sensitive and thoughtful as she would have imagined him to be. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, she is still attracted to him despite all her best efforts not to be.
Right.
It's just really, it's about the tug of war between her rationality and her imagination and her romanticism that she has tried to suppress because she has needed to be practical as a woman who works for her living.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one of my favorite themes in the book is healing and grief. Each character sort of has their own hurdle as far as grief is concerned, and then the healing that comes after that.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if there was anything that made these themes important to you and why you included them in this book.
Wow, that's a really good question. Because I do firmly believe that sometimes we end up as writers telling ourselves the story that we need to hear at the time.
Ooh, yeah.
But now that you mention it, I hadn't lost anybody in particular.
Oh, sure.
However, yeah, it did seem to be something that would connect all the characters. They're all orphans. They all lost their family members in various dramatic circumstances. And they're alone in their grief. And what they really need is each other, is a support from other people around them. But instead, of course, they're all being sort of foolish and building walls around themselves and avoiding discussing it or letting other people share that burden. And it was nice to have the girls who could kind of be a little bit more obvious about working through that in a slightly more outwardly demonstrative way, because for adults it's more of an internal process, but they have some clear issues with the death that they are working through. Yeah,
I wanted to talk to you about that specifically because Rosamund and Daisy are the two girls, and Daisy, both of them, but the impetus is obviously Daisy, and then Rosamund sort of plays off of her quite a bit. But every day Daisy concocts a new way that her doll Millicent dies, whether it's cholera or a drowning, like so many things. She dies every day, and they have to eulogize and bury her. So every time you write a book, I think to myself, wow, Tessa has finally written like the perfect book for me. There's something about it that speaks to me, and I'm like, man, she can't top this. And then the next time you write a book, it happens all over again. But I really, really think, I'm firmly on the record, that between the girls' morbid obsession with illness and death and Alex's novel approach to educating them and just, the grief and healing and the way that you focus on different facets of education and discovery, like I really think you've done it this time.
Aww.
I will probably be proven wrong when the next book comes out.
Yeah,
but
I was just going to say, it sounds like a challenge.
Yeah, right? I am gauntlet thrown. But the listeners know I have a sort of an obsession with the macabre as well. And it seems like that's having a little bit more of a public renaissance.
That's true. The whole true crime sort of thing.
Absolutely. And there's been a lot more communities on the internet popping up where you can actually like sort of be out about your weird obsession with it. So I was wondering if that had anything to do with how this developed for you.
Possibly. I have, now that you mention it, I have gotten kind of into all the true crime podcasts, like so many, like everybody, right?
Totally.
Like everything from Serial to, oh man, I have a silly amount of them that I've listened to. I won't say silly because nothing's silly if it interests you. But I do believe that that's, it is sort of having a moment. And a friend suggested to me that she had heard that perhaps it has something to do with the idea of justice. Like everything right now feels very, like there's no consequences for anything, especially when it comes to certain people. And people are kind of craving this sense of right and wrong and justice, which is interesting. But I think where that sort of morbid fascination of Daisy in particular and her doll, you hear every once in a while these people say that Barbies give girls an unrealistic expectation of what beauty and what in womanhood or maturity looks like.
Absolutely.
But actually, when I was a kid, I was horrible to my Barbies. I think
Me
a
too.
lot of us were, that we did terrible things to them. We cut off their hair and we popped off their heads. And
I actually used to play, I called it crime scene Barbie.
Right.
And I would do similar things to what Daisy did, where I would just like stage really creative deaths with Barbie.
Yeah. And I think some of the worry about that is completely misplaced, because we do not, if you've ever seen a child play, idolization is not what's happening.
No.
They're mostly used we work through different sorts of fears and fascinations with toys when we're younger, and maybe when we're older as well. I think it's something that's more universal than you would think.
It's a way to explore.
Right. I just know that I did all sorts of particularly terrible things. So I really don't think that it's all that unusual.
No.
But being a kid is really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to have that idea that, our childhood was idyllic because we didn't have to pay bills or, go to work or whatever the case may be. But if you really remember honestly, it is really, really hard to be a child. It is hard work.
Well, yeah, so much of childhood is just trial and lots of error.
Yes.
And working through those frustrations.
Yes. This was actually my first time writing children into a book. I have written a lot of teenagers and pre-teenagers, but this is one of my first time writing actual younger children. And I was very concerned about making sure that they felt somewhat, real and not too precocious or idealistic, I guess, or I don't know. It was kind of, I worried about it a lot. And so when the book came out and people were enjoying them, I was very relieved.
That makes sense. Yeah. Oh, one listener, Sarah B, wanted to know if Daisy's obsession was inspired by 2D Smith from Meet Me in St. Louis. Are you familiar with that?
I am. Well, you know what? This is funny because my novella in this upcoming Christmas anthology is actually called Meet Me in Mayfair. And it has some more specific parallels to that movie. Not too much, but definitely there is a quite bloodthirsty younger sister. So maybe it's something I just enjoy. I don't know. Children with a certain inner morbidity.
Well, and then another theme that I personally really liked was sort of your focus on education and discovery in different ways, because Alex, of course, becomes their governess, and Chase's view on that at first is that she should be the disciplinarian and the very traditional educator. And Alex sort of comes to the conclusion that the girls will be served a lot better by a more non-traditional education, that they'll actually be reached that way, whereas they'll just rebel if all he wants them to work on is needlepoint and curtsies. But I loved all of the components that you wove in about what girls should know and how the characters were quietly bucking that. Quietly and not so quietly, actually.
No. That little thread of feminism is something that I will put through all my books, probably. Yep. But definitely the ideas of education and learning through play, that is something that came directly from my life at that time, as we were going through something similar with my son. This is where I talk about, writing what you need to hear at the time.
Yeah.
My son has ADHD, and true story, I kind of came to understand and finally get him checked for that as I was writing Say Yes to the Marquis, because the hero of that book has ADHD. Oh. So I was, of course, it's not called that in the book,
no. Right.
But I was researching it quite a bit, and I realized I hadn't had quite hadn't had a very good understanding of it, because I had that idea, I think many people do, that ADD or ADHD is all about, being hyperactive and bouncing around and
Right.
unable, always being like the naughty kid in class and starting fights and all that sort of thing.
Not being able to sit still.
Yeah, and my son was not like that at all. But he didn't have those behavior problems. So even though every once in a while we would talk about, like, maybe there's something going on there, we always pushed away that possibility because he didn't have those characteristics. But that was something that came out of writing that book, was that we finally had some investigation and realized that, no, there's different forms of ADHD, and he has a pretty profound case of the there's the, I'm going to forget all the words now. There's a combined type. There's an impulsive type, which is a little bit more of the behavior problem.
Physical, right. The physical manifestation.
And then there's the distractible, unable to focus type, which is what he has. And so for the next few years after we had him evaluated and he was diagnosed, he tried various things to help him succeed in his school, because he had such a difficult time completing work in class or doing homework at home, because he would be exhausted from trying to concentrate through the day. And, his teacher's not quite getting it. Unfortunately, I think a lot of adults and a lot of teachers in particular think that ADHD is overdiagnosed and kind of an excuse for kids who just don't want to behave or something like that.
Right.
And which is very frustrating. So anyway, it was a struggle for us for several years. So by the time I was writing this book, we were in almost like crisis mode, because he was having such a hard time in his school. And we eventually hit the point where we just looked at it and said, you know what, he's a smart kid, and the teachers want him to do things their way, but it's just not working for him. So we pulled him out of his traditional school and investigated various alternatives, and we found a school that is like the complete opposite. It makes Montessori look like military school. It is so freeform.
Oh, I dig that.
Yeah, but their attitude is that children learn through doing, and that if a kid wants to learn something, they will. And if you try to force a kid to learn something that they don't want to learn, it's just an exercise in frustration for for everyone involved. And so he has just loved it. And he's like a completely different kid. And our house is just so much more pleasant and calm. Our family life, we don't have to be arguing with him over homework every day.
Oh, yay.
Yeah. And
well,
I know.
He's probably learning more.
I think he really is.
Yeah.
And it's not all, some of it is more real life focused. It's really cute. They call their clubs corporations. And so they have like cooking corporation, where they make, a hot lunch every once or twice a week and charge for it. Or they have, it's very, very student driven, and the students, they write each other up for rule infractions and go to like a sort of little student court if there's going to be a sentence for the student and stuff. It's very, very emphasizes personal responsibility and
engagement. It sounds like
So it's just been fantastic for him. And so when I was writing this book, I had definitely was going through that evolution in my mind of letting go what traditional school needs to look like, and which is kind of hard for a parent, because it can feel like you're letting them off the hook somehow, and they're not going to be prepared for life the same as other kids. But coming to realize that, different kids learn in different ways, and motivating children to learn through play and through real life application is oftentimes more effective than it is to sit them down and just insist that for these 45 minutes we're going to do math.
Yeah, that really comes out in the lesson plans that Alex creates for these girls. I just loved it because without going into too much detail, Alex has a sailing background. Is that a good way to put it? She grew up on the high seas.
Yes.
So the girls have all of these, you know, like sort of darker fascinations, and Rosamond is just, you know, she's a bit of a little girl pirate, honestly.
Yeah, she really is. She craves self-determination, I think, which is what a lot of... Yes, exactly. The ability to take care of herself and to take care of her sister. And I think a lot of kids, especially of her age, are trying to achieve the same thing. You want to know that you could survive if something happened to your parents. Something has happened to her parents. And so she's very interested in real life. You know, that's where a lot of kids start to ask about like jobs and how much does it cost for certain things and ideas of that nature. So she's in that phase herself. And she's motivated by Alex's game, so to speak, of piracy because it has a lot of real world applications.
Yeah, they chart a course from Europe to Malta.
Right,
they learn geography that way.
Exactly.
I loved it. Absolutely loved it. It seemed to me there was also a theme of sex education in this too, which I used to be a sex educator. And I'm
really?
Sure, yeah, my co-host is listening to this right now going, because she hates it when I go on my sex ed tangents. But
I'll love it. Don't worry. I've already learned something about ducks, so you know you can go and teach me other things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of my favorite sections, so I used to start out most of the classes just by doing an icebreaker where we went through all of the medical terms for different anatomy and like what we would talk about. Because I really wanted the kids to get in the mindset of like, if you can't talk about it, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. You know, like when they would cringe during our consent role plays and stuff, I would be like, well, you know, if you're going to be doing this, you need to be able to talk about what's okay and what's not okay. And
what boundaries. A very good point. Yeah.
So if you can't say the word penis, you probably shouldn't be messing with it. And there's literally a section in this book that's like that. I just sort of, you know, I celebrated.
Good.
But the heroine is also very refreshingly open and curious. So was there any inspiration for that in this particular novel?
I don't know. I hopefully try to write heroines who are, regardless of their personal experience level, I want them to own their own sexuality and to make decisions about it and to be, you know, interested in doing whatever it is that they end up doing. So that's something that I hope is a theme throughout my books. But in particular, I kind of liked emphasizing or exploring or something, the idea, without going into too much detail, again, that sex is more than penetration. You know, there's different, you know, it's not like PIV, penis and vagina, now that since we're going to be talking about all these terms, is the only legitimate form or meaningful form of sex. I mean, how do you lose your virginity? I mean, some people will never have that kind of male-female intercourse. Do they count as virgins their whole lives? No, not at all.
Yeah, Erin and I were talking about that on the podcast a while ago, where she was like, you know, the concept of virginity is kind of ridiculous because I have lesbian friends who have literally had babies come out of their vaginas, and yet they are still considered virgins. Right,
right, exactly. Yeah. And I think our whole idea of, you know, virginity and needs to kind of be adjusted. So or die. Yes. I mean, obviously at the time in particular, because the risk of childbearing was, you know, something that it was not, you know, there weren't any, you know, birth control pills or whatever. So it was a little bit something more that required a little bit more caution than other forms of sexual pleasure, gratification. Sure. Right. I was leaning toward Congress, but then I think that is synonymous with intercourse. Oh, yeah. So I mean, it is an important distinction, I think.
Certainly.
But somebody, you know, had asked me about Chase and Alex's first sex scene being, you know, the scene where they actually first have in a chorus, and I'm like, I don't really consider that their first sex scene.
Oh,
I mean,
no, I didn't either.
So you know, and I wanted to write a rake who actually, you know, had some knowledge and realistic methods of avoiding pregnancy or causing pregnancy and contracting disease, because it really was it wasn't quite as easy as just pull out and
right.
Those takes the time.
Yeah, the pull out method is not foolproof.
Although I've done the pull out method with other couples, but yeah. But if you really want to be sure, there is really only certain ways to do that. So
right, absolutely. That actually sort of goes into we had a lot of questions about character development from listeners. So I personally had a question about how you decide your character's views on sex, like their sexual style, their kinks. How does that come about for you?
Oh, wow. I think it kind of comes, hopefully, organically from the character's personalities. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say that that's somewhere I start with any particular character. Because for me, the romance is the plot. A lot of authors, especially if you're writing some kind of a suspense plot or some other more intricate plot than I write, you have to take care of all those other things that are happening. And I'm just not good at those kinds of intricate plotting. So for me, the romance usually is the plot. So I feel like the emotions and the sex have to be reflective of one another. The emotional tension makes the sexual tension higher, which makes the emotional tension higher, so they build on one another and are interwoven. So if there are, certain sort of power imbalances or various aspects related in the emotional tension, I will often try to find a way that the sexual tension will reflect that or balance it or add to it or shade that in a more nuanced way. Like, for example, I guess the Duchess deal is a good example because the hero is very scarred. And so, of course, that's a big, big deal when he gets into bed with the heroine. He has a lot of fears and concerns about what's that meaning to his sex life and who he is now compared to who he was before, and will he be rejected, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And yeah, the scene that came to mind for me from the Duchess deal was when she sort of astride him and she kisses up one side of his face and then down the other, and he says he feels like his two halves are finally being knitted together. Oh,
yay! Yeah, I know. They so that was really important, right? And it's not just that, like, accepting scars, it's, or like refusing to see them or something like that, which is not realistic anyway. It's that, realizing that he is the sum of his parts, we all are, right? And
absolutely.
So when you love somebody, you are loving all the different facets of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So our listener, Anne, had a lot of questions about creating a character, and she wanted to know sort of how you got started and like how you get started with each character, and if you have any tips on developing characters with rich backstories. She was asking about inspiration. Like, how does that work for you?
Oh, wow. I wish that I could give that a simple answer, that it works, that I do it this way or that way. The truth is that it really is different depending on the book and the story. Sometimes I really do start with the situation, sort of the meet cute of it all, and work from there. I think one example of that is Any Duchess Will Do, where the heroine is a serving girl and the hero is a duke. So, I just liked the idea that this playboy duke is dragged down to this town full of spinsters by his mother and said, she just says, pick one. And just to get back at her, he picks the serving girl, right?
Right.
And so that's really where that whole book emerged from. I mean, I knew I had a serving girl in Spindle Cove that would make a good heroine for this, but it really just came from that whole idea. And then everything about their personalities was just hopefully, trying to give them a good motivations for why they would do. Why is she going to say yes? She can use the money. Well, but she's a very proud person. So why is she willing to accept money? And so it has a lot to do with her sister. And why does she have to come back within a week while her sister is waiting on her? This kind of thing, sometimes it's just the requirements of the plot.
Sure.
Make me come up with characteristics that will fit that.
Okay.
So that's one way. And then sometimes it really does start more from a character, especially if there's a character that's been a side character in other stories. And people have asked I wanted to write a story about them. And I think a good example of that would be Charlotte, who is from the Spindle Cove series as well. And she's the younger sister of two of the other heroines. And she's a teenager in that series, and she has a lot of spirit and good humor, and she's sort of like, she's not sassy. She's just, I would say the spirit. I think that she even describes it that one, her oldest sister is the beauty of the family, and the middle sister is the brains, and then she's the spirit, right? She's got right. Yeah. So when I was thinking about what would be a story for her, I had to kind of come up with, obviously she had to age up a little bit. And so what's happened in the meantime? What's she been doing? And what's her situation coming into it? The same thing. Her hero was a character that was a side character from Say Yes to the Marquis. And so I had to fill in a lot of what was happening along the way in order to put them together. So it just really comes in starts and fits for me. And some of the things that are personality quirks and histories, they just evolve along the way in one way or another. Ash in the Duchess deal has a habit of swearing with Shakespearean language.
So lovely.
And that it just came out because my mother happened to give my husband this little book of Shakespearean curses as a stocking stuffer gift for Christmas.
Excellent.
And so I immediately stole it, and I'm like, this is going to be one of Ash's personality traits.
Oh, I love
it. And I don't know, it just, sometimes it's just random stuff like that. Or Izzy and Ransom in Romancing the Duke have this little game of Would You Rather. She's been corresponding with a younger boy who read her father's stories, and he asks her all these sort of silly, like, would you rather find $5 on the ground or have $100 dangled 20 feet above you or something like that. Okay. These very strange little decisions that you have to kind of talk through and think about. And so I have a bunch of those in the book, and those are completely from my son at the time. He loved to ask those kinds of, like, would you rather this or would you rather that?
How fun. Yeah.
Would you rather would you rather have a bathtub full of honey or take a shower in oatmeal or so, like yeah. Weird things like that, and so that just came from there. Just little bits and pieces of life.
Well, actually, honey has antibacterial qualities. So
you're going to pick the honey.
I would do that. Yeah. Okay. Plus, it tastes delicious if you accidentally go under.
I guess. Yeah. Well, see, oatmeal can be good for the skin, too.
Oh, oatmeal's very, very good for the skin.
So,
yeah. It's a good moisturizer.
Right. I think like a honey oatmeal body treatment could probably be the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any rules about creating heroines and heroes as they relate to each other?
Well, you never want them to be too much like each other. I mean, Fair. I think that's the main rule of all romance. There has to be conflict between the two of them. And so, I think that you want two people who, they can have common things in common, and they probably should have something in common, but they should also have something major that they have completely different worldviews on, and so, and one or both of them might be wrong about it, but, it's just because we were just talking about Romancing the Duke. The heroine, Izzy, has a pretty open idea of romance. She really believes in love, even though she has never yet fallen in love herself.
Uh-huh.
And the hero was very like, forget it. I mean, this is a common dynamic in a whole lot of romance, where the woman is more romantic than the male. But they're a little bit to the extremes of that. Or, just how to, maybe they have different ideas on how to solve a problem. Or maybe, they're just, one is serious and one is tries to take things more lightly, because what's the good of worrying because you can't control stuff. So some kind of philosophical difference, I think, is important. And then it has to manifest in the plot. It can't just be something that's just sort of tangential to the rest of their existence. It should be reflected in the action of the story and have consequences. And then you have to like tie them together so they can't just walk separate ways. And so they have to work it out.
Period.
Right. Exactly. Like, well, agree to disagree. Goodbye. They've got to stuck one way or another. Maybe in a bathtub full of honey. I don't know.
Yeah.
There we go. Let's do an entire novella where the hero and the heroine are stuck together with honey. I don't know.
I'm into it. The implications are vast and powerful.
And then, of course, there's a bear. So,
oh my God, you just made one of our listeners' lives. If you could possibly, we have an Aussie bear lover.
Oh dear.
And if you could get a bear, maybe in Penny's book, if you can weave a bear in there, you will make Leanne's world.
Oh my gosh. Maybe she could rescue a bear from bear baiting.
I think that would be great. I mean, just jot it down. It's a possibility.
Yeah, it's in the mix now. I'm working on this book, so, I'll keep it in mind.
Fair enough. Okay, so you actually started writing Jane Austen fan fiction, right?
Yes.
So one of the biggest recurring questions that we had was, can we have someplace?
Oh my gosh.
Available? Where
can we find it? This is really sad, but I am not sure. The sites that I posted it on are like defunct now. And I probably somewhere have it backed up, maybe.
Oh man,
I know, but you know what? I think it would kind of be a disappointment. Maybe I'm not really trying to hold it hostage or anything like that. But I'm not really sure that anybody's gonna be all that excited about it.
Fair enough. It's always nice to see where your heroes have their roots, though. So
oh look, here it is. Here it is. Somebody at the time would put these really sweet little PDFs together with illustrations and everything. Maybe I'll put this up on somewhere. I'll send you. If I do, I'll send you the link.
That would be lovely. And is that why you write historical, as Erin calls it, England Times romance?
Yes, completely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's always a huge Jane Austen and historical romance, historical fiction fan.
Right.
It's really the only kind of romance I ever really considered writing.
Really? And do you think that will be the way you look at your career going forward? Because we had a couple of listeners who wanted to know if you would ever consider writing a contemporary or a paranormal, just because they love your snappy, witty dialogue so much. And they thought that it might. Yeah, they thought it would transfer really, really well to those subgenres as well.
Of course, there's some people who would say I write contemporaries. People are just dressed up. And, I do not consider it that way, but
no.
I do think, well, I say this now, this is probably the surest way to make it happen. I don't see myself writing paranormal because it's not my jam. And there's so much world building that goes into creating a paranormal setting.
Yeah.
For a Regency, the world building is there. We just all borrow it from each other, basically.
Absolutely.
It's created almost like a fandom with a certain canon, and that's the way I look at it.
Mm-hmm.
As far as contemporary, that thought occurs to me every once in a while, but it hasn't happened yet and isn't in any particularly imminent plans.
Fair. That makes sense.
But I wouldn't say it would never happen. That's definitely more likely than paranormal.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you mentioned that there's sort of a world that you write in when you're a Regency author, because I feel like there's so many questions that people have. Actually, one of them, I love her phrasing. Erica I'll just compliment you. She says that your heroines are so badass and rolling in confidence porn. So you enjoy that.
How sweet.
Yeah. But the second part of her question was like, how do you find them a place in England times, right? Because that's the joke in our podcast, is that Erin, she doesn't have the bandwidth to be like, oh, Victorian is and Regency is. She's just like, England times.
England times. And I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah. But it does raise these questions of like, quote unquote, historical accuracy.
Oh,
and like, what is appropriate? What is reaching? And I get frustrated with it just because those women existed.
Absolutely.
Just because we don't talk about them or just because they're not widely known doesn't mean they didn't already have a place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think that the modern era invented anything. There's nothing new under the sun. You can tell I'm a pastor's girl. It's from Ecclesiastes. So I believe human nature is human nature. And people do not change nearly as much as we might want to assume that they have or did.
Sure.
I believe firmly that there were women doing very, so we know about some of them, and I'm sure that we don't know about a great many more.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of women who were taking strong roles, who were doing fascinating things, making discoveries and exploring and fighting, and some of them we know about, and some of them are probably lost to history, and some may be uncovered yet, which would be wonderful. Particularly in the Regency, England, I talked about this in the other podcast, so I don't want to go super crazy with it now, but they were at war for literally decades, and a huge number of the younger generation of men were just either gone, like, from England or gone as in dead. And there's no way that the society could have kept functioning unless women stepped in to run shops, to run farms, to do all kinds of things that we generally assume women didn't do in Regency England. So I completely reject the idea that women weren't doing anything except for sitting around needle pointing. But it's also true that there probably were women who, especially in the upper classes, who were confined to calling on one another and doing needlepoint and whatnot. And, too bad for them. I'm sure that they wished, most of them wished probably that they had slightly more self-determined existences. Nothing wrong with needlepoint if that's your thing, but if you feel forced into it, then it must have been quite frustrating. So, and I also kind of take the idea of Jane Austen's books, because in my mind, if you can find it in Austen, of course it's appropriate to the period. There, some of the traditional Regencies kind of set up this idea that a man and a woman alone together at all were, considered, the woman was considered compromised. Well, that's not true. I mean, Elizabeth and Darcy are in the same room together alone all the time, and she's not compromised.
Right.
There's people who run off together and elope and definitely have premarital sex, and it's strongly implied, if not, for example, with Lydia, I mean, obviously she's shacked up with the guy, and so to say that a girl from a gentleman's family would never do that sort of thing is obviously wrong.
It's absolutely ridiculous. Well,
so
I always end up pointing out the support that Mr. Bennet gives to Elizabeth in all of her romantic decisions.
Oh, absolutely. That's so true.
Yeah, I love that he's a man in a text that was written during the period that's like, no, my daughter is smart and capable, and if she doesn't want to marry that man, she will not.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And even though that would mean a lot to their family too, it's not just her,
Exactly.
It would have been huge for their whole security of her whole family, and he's just like, forget it.
I know. If only he'd been smart and gone after Mary.
Yes,
the one
well,
suited for
and
him.
I will tell you, there's quite a bit of fan fiction in which which that happens.
I dig it. I dig it.
Yeah.
Well, and you've sort of described your work as like Jane Austen meets rom-com, right?
I think that that's the idea. One time I pitched, back when I was writing A Week to Be Wicked, I told my editor it was going to be Jane Austen meets Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. So I think that went over well with the sales team.
Oh,
so,
I dig it.
Yeah, I think like rom-coms or buddy comedy type things, with, but in a Regency setting.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have any favorite rom-coms you want to share about?
Oh, wow. Well, definitely any road trip, like a Week to Be Wicked, owes a lot to movies like Romancing the Stone or,
Ooh.
Yeah. So because there's similar things generally happen in road trips. You're trapped in the same room together. You end up having to work some menial task to get back on track. You kind of stumble into some sort of party or village festival or whatever the case is. Finally, the characters get cleaned up and shed their muddy clothes. And, those sorts of scenes are in every great road trip romance, it feels like. So that's definitely one that stands the test of time. Sometimes when there's certain ones that I like to watch when I feel like I need some dialogue mojo, like not that to steal dialogue, but just like, oh yeah, that's the kind of dynamic. And that's different things all the way from some of the Oscar Wilde adaptations of the last few years the last few decades, I should say. Or there was a good Importance of Being Earnest with Rupert Everett and Colin Firth. Anyway, and he writes, of course, the most brilliant dialogue, or something more modern like The Proposal with Sandra Bullock and Ryan Reynolds. It's not my favorite movie, but the banter between them and the spirit is awesome. It's definitely the best part of that movie.
Yeah. Other than Betty White, right?
Oh God, she's the best in anything.
She can be my empress of everything.
Or even like Deadpool. I was very enamored with Deadpool when I wrote The Duchess Deal. So just anything with really good dialogue is a favorite of mine. Or My Best Friend's Wedding. I love that movie, and it's just got so much hilarious. It's not all between the hero and heroine either. In fact, most of it isn't. Look, there's another Rupert Everett movie. Somebody needs to bring back Rupert Everett. So yeah, those kinds of things I find very inspiring. Just anything generally with great tension and dialogue.
So that's what gets you in a good headspace to create the dialogue that has become like sort of part of your brand, because we had a lot of listener questions about that too.
I'm just like amazed that you had so many listener questions, period. I think this is fantastic. I was like, well, so people will have asked like 3 questions or something. And you're like,
no,
we had a lot of listener questions about this.
We have the best listeners in the GD world. Like,
that's fantastic.
Yeah,
hi listeners.
The community they're planning meetups. We're becoming actual friends.
What?
That's
so awesome.
It's amazing. I'm the luckiest. Like it's crazy. So Elizabeth,
humor and banter,
right? So,
right?
Yeah, Erin, Elizabeth, and Emily all asked questions surrounding this, and Elizabeth, I thought, brought up a really good point, because she said that she's bought and read all of your books, but lately she's been also doing the audiobook from the library.
Oh, yeah.
And she says, well, first of all, I forget her name, but the woman who does this series is
Mary
just
Jane
brilliant.
Wells. Yes.
Mary Jane
I think she is the best. And not that I haven't had good narrators in the past, but she has done an amazing job. And, the Duchess Deal audiobook, actually, it won the Audie Award for Best Romance. Like, not Best Historical Romance or Best, but Best Romance. It was pretty cool. So, and that's, that just shows what an amazing narrator she is. And how great she's done. In fact, I still haven't. I've never listened to a complete audiobook of one of my books, but hers are the only ones that I can bear to listen to more than like
Aw.
5 minutes because.
Yeah, it's funny because humor comes off differently on the page and then when you hear it, and so a lot of the listeners were wondering like how you approach integrating humor into your novels.
Man, I guess I try to make sure it's pretty much present completely. I mean, I do know that that's one of the big reasons that most readers will pick up my books is because they expect to laugh and enjoy it. So I don't want to ever let people down and like suddenly do the somber, angsty Tessa Dare novel, where there's nothing funny in it.
Where all of a sudden you become Adele and you're like, Adele, you've been married. You have a child. Are you not happy now? Why are you talking about this breakup still?
Oh, no, Adele. Okay. It took me a while to figure out which Adele you meant, but okay, got it. No, that's so true. Yeah. But I don't really feel like I have to work that hard because I enjoy writing the humorous parts more than probably any other. And to me, life is funny. Love is funny. We do stupid things when we're in love.
Yeah.
Crazy things happen in real life. I am incredibly clumsy. On not a regular basis, I don't know, but every once in a while, I just completely slip and eat it and just totally go sprawling. It happens to me in the Denver airport just last year. Total sprawl on my face, like to the point where people stop and are like, "Are you okay, ma'am?" That kind of like, oh God, I was okay until you said ma'am. So that happens to me on a regular basis, and I will defend my slapstick comedy to the death because it's part of my life, and I do not feel ashamed of using it whatsoever.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a great lake scene in the Governess Game that it was so good because I was trying to feel like bad because the heroine's fear was real, but at the same time the outcome was just so funny.
I'm glad that worked for you.
Yeah.
Usually there's certain scenes and I was telling somebody a while ago, I think, that writing humor in a book is really difficult because you don't know whether what made you laugh, and I do laugh aloud as I'm writing because if I can't make myself laugh, then who else am I going to make laugh?
Yeah.
But you still don't know for sure if anyone else is going to find it funny. So it's like standing at one end of this really long tunnel and yelling this joke and then waiting months to see if some laughter echoes back, because you don't know if it's going to work. And no joke works for everybody, which is fine, but it's such a relief. And the main reason that I will read reviews at the beginning of when a book is out, I don't read them forever and all of them, but the first few weeks I generally do because I want to know if they laughed in the right place.
Oh, yeah.
Or sometimes people will send me tweets like, "Oh my God, this part, I just died." And usually I want there to be that kind of a scene, and I can kind of feel it when there is, and I can kind of feel it when there's not. And so what's the scene that people are going to tweet me about and be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe," or "This part cracked me up," or whatever it was. Because it's usually there's one or two scenes that are, so like this one, it was all the doll funerals, right?
Oh yeah.
Like the doll funerals were hysterical.
And his eulogies are just so good.
Right. Well, thank you. I'm glad that I wanted to write like an appendix of like 20 eulogies, but I had kind of like spent my own creativity on the ones that are in there. So I couldn't think of anything
Fair.
or anything that would be worth reading, including extra. So that one was the doll funerals. Last book, do you want to, Duchess Deal, I think I kind of knew it would be, or hoped it would be, the scene where Ash goes to her father's house and sneaks in the middle of the night and pretends to be the devil.
Yeah.
Like, when I wrote that scene, I felt like, okay, this is the scene. This is the funny scene. Or when Do You Want to Start a Scandal, there's the mom's sex ed lesson using the peach and the eggplant. And so I thought that would probably be a
the
hit
emojis,
with readers.
yeah.
So that was kind of fun because people would just tweet me like the emojis and like and that was like, oh yeah, I know what part you got to. So I want some level of humor throughout the book, but something in particular that will stick as the funniest or the most outlandish part. That people will remember the book by.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of books that will make you laugh, but like what will stick in your mind and be like, oh yeah, this is the book with all the crazy doll humor.
Mm-hmm.
I think like nobody will ever forget the croquet or Pall Mall or whatever it's called in the Bridgerton's play in Julia Quinn's series. There's like this epic game of Pall Mall in The Viscount Who Loved Me, I believe it's in that one.
Oh, I haven't read that yet.
Oh my gosh, it's so fun. And that's like the scene, right?
Uh-huh.
So, it has the mallet of death.
Isn't that Colin's book? Is that Colin's book?
No, that's Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. This is Anthony's book.
Yes. Okay.
And so it's pretty hilarious. It's very, very, very hilarious. And it's classic Julia Quinn, but it's like that one that she will, people remember forever. And so I really want there to be something in the book that will like stick in people's minds, hopefully afterward. It's also some relief to be able to write witty people, because I often, you think of that, I think a lot of us are this way. It's not until 3 days later or weeks later in the shower that you think of the perfect retort to something. Yeah. But when you're writing a book, you can think of that 3 weeks later or something and then put it in the book and make your character seem so much wittier than anybody or you in real life. So that's the best.
Oh yeah, that's really true.
But it comes.
I don't know, it's always so amazing to me because I am not a person who can craft humor. I can be situationally funny and, that kind of thing, but I can't sit down and like write a joke that will make people laugh.
But that's fine. I mean, everybody's got their thing, right? And so some authors, readers pick up the book, knowing that they're just going to be in for this emotional roller coaster and they need to probably have some tissues nearby. And that's great too. So it's not that everybody needs to try to write humor. In fact, if you have to try really hard to write it, it's probably you shouldn't.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because it's just either something that is part of your skill set or I don't know. I don't want to make it sound like it's something
can come naturally.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't think it's some particular, rare talent either, but some people just evolves naturally from their voice, and some people would have to be a real struggle. And if it's a real struggle for you, it's probably not worth fighting against your own voice. Yeah, you have to find what works for you. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good tip for our aspiring author listeners too. Don't try to fit yourself into a square peg or a square hole if you're a round cylinder. I don't know.
Absolutely. that thing. Right.
That old, so and so.
When in the shower tomorrow, we'll come up with a perfectly funny way
we will
to have said that.
It's really true. Okay, so when you're doing research, what is your least favorite thing about this this historical time period of like England, Ireland, Scotland? Do you have a least favorite thing, and like how do you navigate that in your writing?
The least favorite thing was like it's okay to swear, right?
Yeah.
His least favorite thing is how shitty the upper class was. I mean, and the whole idea of colonialism and imperialism and blah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially if you get to, this is why another, the whole argument around historical accuracy gets to me. Like, really? I don't want to write historically accurate dukes. We're probably all bigots who made their money on the backs of people who were if not enslaved, in
the new
right,
world.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not real
Either
ethical
literal slaves
means.
or
Right. And even
economic
if they're
slaves.
old money, super
Yeah.
old money, it came from serfs or.
Right.
So none of it is really great. And that's quite honestly a reason why I like to write over the top, because I don't feel like the actual realistic upper classes of the time were super great.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes sense. And I like the way that you and a couple of other authors really pay homage to that, usually via the characters' parents or their ancestors, or the duties they feel compelled by, but still are able to
that's
overcome.
one way to get around it. That's
Right.
one way to get around it, is to make them very like principled and dutiful, and feel obliged to be good stewards of their title, of their land, and protective of their tenants and whatnot. Yeah, they never quite go so far as to like redistribute that land.
No.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a struggle, that whole tension between taking what I personally love about it, the romantic parts of it, without letting the characters be too. It's something I think about a lot and don't really have a I'm not completely have not yet come to a great rationalization or
Right.
a resolution of it. I do think, though, that that's one reason also that I don't mind writing so much humor, is because if you're making fun of the lords and ladies, it's definitely punching up, right? They don't, in terms of, I'm talking about punching up and punching down.
Yeah. Oh, certainly.
It's like always in humor, you always want to punch up. So punching up at the Dukes is always totally fair game. If any sliver of society is due for their humor comeuppance, it's the upper classes of Regency England. So, I feel that's one good thing. Like, I feel like I have a complete license to mock them mercilessly.
Oh, most certainly.
But yeah, it's something that I think historical romance is having a big conversation with at the moment, right? Like, there was more to the actual historical period than rich white people, and for me, it's like, how do you bring that in without punching down? In the sense of, you don't want to make somebody who was on the unfortunate end of that system. I don't want to mock that experience in any sort of way. So,
well, yeah, and it is something that you navigate daily, and you navigate in each novel. Absolutely.
Yeah, and hopefully sometimes find a way to do it better than others. I mean, writing When a Scot Ties Him Out was really difficult because I love Highlander heroes, and I love, but especially at writing When in the Regency, I mean, man, Scotland was totally getting shafted by the English.
Absolutely.
And by the Scottish aristocracy as well. So, the clearances were happening, and it was terrible. It was not a romantic era in Scotland's history whatsoever. So that was tough. Like, how do I balance the realities of life at that time in the Highlands versus making it still sort of romantic and humorous? That was kind of tricky.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but I was able to make that part of my hero's motivation, that so many of these Scottish soldiers had returned from war to find literally nothing. Like, their whole communities were gone, their land was taken over by sheep grazing, and too bad for you. You can go stay on the coast and harvest seaweed. That was one, thing you could do, or you could move to Canada or America or Australia, pretty much. And the generous, I've been reading about the history of Canada the last few days, and, there was a very generous Earl of Selkirk who actually saw it as his, I say generous in quotes, saw it as his altruistic gesture to help resettle Scottish people in Canada.
Oh, wow.
So it's like you're going to get
Wow.
pushed off your ancestral land.
Yeah.
But I'm going to help you have, set up a new home in Canada. So
Oh
it's
my
like,
gosh.
Okay.
Thanks, question mark?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, anyway,
Well,
I
so-
don't want to get into the weeds too much or the heather too much with that, but yeah.
No, I get that. But we also had a question about research rabbit holes, and I think that relates pretty well. What have been some of your favorite research rabbit holes, and like how do you take yourself out of them? How do you extricate yourself if you need to?
Well, for me, research is lots of fun because I'm a
Yeah.
librarian, and so I don't think one has to be a librarian to find research fun. Just have to be curious. So research rabbit holes are a great way to enrich your understanding of a period, and they're also a great way to procrastinate. And I am a fan of both. So rabbit holes are great. However, the hardest part of writing is to resist. It's not the research. The hardest part of research is resisting the urge to use all of it.
Ooh.
So, because nobody.
I relate to that. Hard.
Yeah, right. And I think it's a misconception that historical authors have a harder time with research. Every contemporary author I know has to do a ton of research too, about locations, about professions, and possibly even more, because if you get it wrong, then that's somebody's actual real life modern experience. Absolutely. That they can, call you on. And how many people really know whether daffodils were blooming in Hyde Park during this month or something, not that they weren't there. So I think that historical writers don't really have a much harder time with research than anybody else, but we certainly can be a lot of fun, and of course my favorite part of research is traveling. That's the best. Having tax deductible justification to go stay in castles and whatnot is a really, really good part of the job.
Ah, shucks.
Yeah. Darn. What a grind.
That makes sense. Are there any badass ladies that come to mind from your research of late?
Of late?
Or anytime?
Well, for sure, a lot of A Week's View Wicked and Minerva's character was based on Mary Anning, who was a fossil collector in Lyme Regis, which is slightly different part of the southern coast. But southern coast of England is called the Jurassic Coast because there are so many fossils, so many rich fossil records to be found there. And she would had this scaffold pulley system where she would descend down these steep chalk cliffs and hammer out fossils, and then she would sell them to these wealthy gentlemen who would go present them at the Royal Geological Society as their discoveries. So she kind of eked out a living doing this while these guys got the credit. Nowadays she gets a little bit more
recognition
there. Thank you. So that's not enough.
Not enough.
And in fact, I was looking for her at the British Natural History Museum in the display by the their famous dinosaurs. They had lists of paleontologists, and to my memory, I looked. Maybe I just missed it. She wasn't there. I was just shocked. I thought, that's terrible. What are they doing? Come on, add your little Mary Anning plaque. But she's somebody that I think people are still learning more about her contribution. And then, when I was researching this current book, The Governess Game, Alex is an astronomer, and there are actually lots of female astronomers, and she goes into that a little bit at some point where she's talking with Chase, how many there were. And I find that fascinating as well, and I think that might be partly because it was a science that you could do from home. Right. You could literally make astronomical discoveries from your backyard. Yep. So there wasn't a barrier for women of opportunity to travel necessarily, or equipment or ships or, any of those, or access to laboratories or whatever the case may be. If you had access to a telescope, you could sit in your backyard and look for comets quite easily. So, there were a lot of women who were involved. and made discoveries of their own. And Caroline Herschel actually was the sister of William Herschel, the first royal astronomer at Greenwich. And she discovered, I can't remember how many, but several comets, and that were
credited to her?
Credited to
Cool.
her, yes. And she actually was the first female member of, Academy of Sciences, or whatever the thing is called, and was the first woman to receive a income from the crown for being an astronomer. Of course, it was less than half of what her brother got,
but story as old as time, right?
Yeah, we're still fighting that battle, aren't we? And sadly, I think that I like to pit women with interesting interests against the sexism of their day when I write Regency romance. However, part of the reason I like to do that is because we still have the same kind of thing going on. I mean, it's not all in the past, it
Absolutely.
Still feels relatable in many ways. So yeah, we still don't have equal pay.
Yeah, there are still professions where women there's a much higher barrier to entry than there is for men.
We still have slut shaming.
Yeah, the double standards you just mentioned also. Not great.
Nope. Hey, and we still, much like the ducks, still evolving our ability to make our own decisions about what level
our
of choices we have.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And the accompanying moral judgments that surround it. It's all still...
Yeah, it's all still very, very present day.
We have not defeated those vestiges
of
sexism in our society.
That's part of the issue that I have with so many people's historical accuracy claim, or the way that can squeak them out, because I'm just we love to think of ourselves as so evolved,
right?
But, as you said earlier, we didn't reinvent anything.
Nope.
We're still battling the same issues, just in slightly different variations.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And yeah, so it's true. It's the past is not as different. It's not as far away as you think. And the future's the current modern day is not as evolved as we would like to think either. So
no.
Yeah.
And if certain powers that be have their way, we will go way back.
Well, let's just hope that the general progress of humanity is forward, even
Absolutely.
if you had the Victorian age following the Regency, where women kind of were pressed back into traditional roles.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we had a lot of advances with the suffrage and World War II. And then, the 50s, 60s happened and kind of squished back down. And then, so it just,
there's so
let's
much
just
ebb and
hope
flow.
The general trend is upward.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a couple of publishing questions.
Okay.
One of them was from our resident Aussie bear lover.
Okay.
She wants to know, because on the Wicked Wallflowers podcast, you talked about the cover and buying the dresses for the cover shoots and all of that. What goes into differing covers for the international markets?
Oh, that is decided by each publisher in the international territory.
Oh.
And so in general, I at least trust the local publisher to know what sells best in that market. So don't really have or want to have a whole lot of control over the international covers. Once you kind of sell the foreign rights to the foreign publisher for a traditional book, it's kind of goodbye.
It's sort of out of their hands.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes they will send them to me can you approve this cover? And I've never said no. I mean, maybe if my name was misspelled, I would. But it's how am I going to know whether that will appeal to Russian readers or whatever the case may be? And so, that publisher is going to know better than I do. So
that makes sense. So I'd like to transition really quick to Tessa Dare the Reader.
Aha!
What was your introduction to romance? Do you remember your first romance novel?
I think my first romance novel, my first romance that really captured my interest as a romance was the novelization of The Empire Strikes Back, which I read when I was, I think, 7 or 8 years old. We were going on vacation and my mom told me I could pick one book that she would buy to take with me. And so I picked like the thickest book I could find because I liked to read in like one, how is one book going to last me 2 weeks? So I picked the novelization of Empire Strikes Back. And of course I read it within 2 days or whatever. But the parts with Han and Leia, of course, I would just go back and read them again and again. And I think that's where I realized looking back, I think that's where my formative interest in romance maybe came from. My first
that's
proper romance novels, I think, were probably Julie Garwood in my teen years. I love Julie Garwood. So she wrote the medieval Scots. And I was just talking with Helen K. Diamond at an event on Sunday about The Bride being one of both of our first romance novels and how wonderful we found it because the heroines were strong but also a little naive, and the heroes were alpha but also protective and caregiving, and there was humor and also lots of sexual tension, and it's just definitely one of my formative authors for sure, Julie Garwood.
Very cool. And do you have any recent reads that are among your favorites?
Wow. So next to me on the nightstand here, but I've already read it, is The Kiss Quotient, which I think probably everybody has heard about or read already, but I just inhaled it. It was amazing. Loved it. Right now I am reading something that's not a romance novel. I like to I don't read exclusively romance because I feel like it's a little too hard to turn off the work brain.
Yeah, it's literally your job.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I have an advanced copy of the new Jodi Picoult, which is called A Spark of Light. And when we were just talking about reproductive health and choices, it's set in an abortion clinic during a standoff with a man who has come in with a gun and taken hostages to make his own political point. And then the cop who is managing the standoff, his daughter is inside the clinic. So like there's a whole bunch of different like points of view represented, and I can't imagine a more timely and time for the book to come out.
Yeah.
And, I haven't finished it yet, but I am definitely looking forward to doing so soon, and really admire her for taking that on, and I think it should be a really thought-provoking and conversation-starting book.
Ooh, that's exciting. And that has not been published yet, right?
No, it comes out at the end of this month, I believe.
Cool.
So it's not very far off.
Okay, great. Awesome. And so you are a must/auto buy for a ton of our listeners.
Yay, thank you.
Yeah. But now we want to know, who are your Tessa Dares as a reader?
Oh my gosh. Auto buys. So one is definitely Lisa Kleypas. I've been reading her forever, and there's a lot of people I would want to be when I grow up, but Lisa Kleypas is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
And I just always admire that she gets so much deep emotion and also humor and also like family and friend dynamics. She's just so good. And her heroines do interesting things.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just love her. And there's a whole bunch of other historical authors that I probably that I could list, but then I'll be like afraid of leaving somebody out. So I probably will not I will not attempt it because I'll be like, oh God, I forgot that one. And then it will be okay. I will mention, because it's a little bit outside the usual het historical romance, is Kat Sebastian. I love her books. She's been writing a variety of she started out with mostly gay male pairings, but now she's going in some different queer and gender non-binary type characters, and but she writes regardless of what sort of pairing and what characters she has. I just love her emotions. She's just amazing, and I got to read her very first book early, and ever since she's just been totally on the list.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, so I would definitely say those two.
All right,
two
cool.
of my definite auto buys. I'll go. I could go on, but let's leave it there.
Yeah. So, do you have a romance like trope that is your catnip?
Ooh, romance trope that is my catnip. I love like a Beauty and the Beast type story or a Wrong Side of the Tracks type story. I just love those. You know, hits me right in the id, as Sophie Jordan and Sarah McLean mentioned this a lot, like writing towards your own id. And so I think that's something that hits me in the id, but I'm not always the greatest at, it's not necessarily something that hits me in the writing sweet spot, the sort of more, a little bit darker, angstier hero than I would normally write, but I love to read.
All right, excellent. Okay, so a lot of our listeners talk about how romance, and especially romance written by feminist authors, has become an even more vital part of their self-care routine right now, sort of because of the current political climate and everything else. We were all talking about the timing of the Duchess deal and a couple of the Easter eggs that you dropped in there about false news and that kind of thing. Has the current landscape impacted your writing a lot, would you say?
I think so. I mean, how could it not? And I think, right, when I was writing the Duchess deal, those things were definitely a part of it. And when I was writing the Governess Game, Me Too was very much on my mind. Yeah. Because it suddenly became a whole different thing that I was writing this employer and this governess romance. And so it made me very, very cautious and concerned about how I wrote their relationship. Because I did not want it to be exploitative in any way or anything of that nature.
And then I was also wondering, have you faced any pushback or criticism about either those components of your writing, or, you know, you're also really vocal on Twitter, which I friggin' love. Have you gotten any pushback from readers about that?
Yeah, like very, very rarely will I get something like that. Especially not on Twitter. On Facebook, I don't go there anymore on Facebook. Not because,
really? Yeah.
No, I don't have the time. The last time I posted anything remotely political is I posted pictures of myself, not necessarily of myself, actually, of a protest for the travel ban back when it was instituted. And it did not bother me that there were some people who were like, I'm unfollowing you or whatever. That did not bother me at all. But what bothered me is that people were getting into arguments with each other on my wall. And like, I couldn't, didn't have the time and the energy to moderate it. Yeah. And so I was like, I don't want this. I think on Twitter, it doesn't feel like it's my responsibility to be careful of what's, like in Facebook, it's my page. Like there's my name at the top of it. And if people are like bickering back and forth on my page, then it feels like I'm somehow hosting it. And I just don't want to. I feel like I should moderate it or something of that nature. I guess there may be ways somebody told me there are ways to turn off comments on a post, but
yeah, but even then that's its own sort of statement.
It is, exactly. Yeah. It's its own sort of statement. And I just don't feel like that's what it should be about. So I am just strictly work basically on Facebook, and it's too much. It's too much. I just don't have
it would become a full-time job.
Exactly. I don't have the kind of time to devote to it that I feel like I would have to with the number of followers to my page that I have and the diversity of them. But if somebody does say but you know what, it's all in my books anyway. It's all in my books. Yeah,
totally.
So
yeah, it's funny. Aaron and I are, we're not a political podcast, and we don't really say any explicit political beliefs, but it's pretty easy to tell where we each lie because of the overall commentary that we make on the novels that we read.
Absolutely.
Like romance is so personal, and the personal is political, and that's just the way that it ends up coming out,
Yeah. I don't know how you could keep it out of your fiction. A lot of your beliefs and your values and your likes and dislikes come out when you write. So I think there's probably nothing that reveals more about me than the actual books themselves. So
yeah, people
are welcome. If it makes them stop reading my books, like, well, I'm not sure why you like them in the first place. So go ahead, by all means. And if somebody refuses to read my books because they're super, bigoted or something, well, then it's fine. I don't really want your money. So
yeah, absolutely.
I don't think that but like I said, if that's happening, it's a very small number and it's not having an effect on my sales overall. So, I'm fine with conversation, debate. I think there's a whole lot of things that people can have different views on and have intelligent conversation about. So it's not as though I am a person who's like, my way is the only right way, but there are certain things that are values that will come out in my writing and come out when I'm unfiltered on Twitter. And I don't think there's a whole lot of reason to try to hide them because, as we've said, silence is a kind of statement of its own. And sometimes I feel bad about the fact that I'm not really speaking out or saying anything on Facebook about certain issues that are important to me. But it's just a decision of where to spend your time and energy, I guess,
Yeah, most definitely. Well, and on that note of like time and energy and everything else, we always end each episode with a self-love recommendation or a lady love recommendation. So if you want me to start off, I will, and then you can think of one maybe?
Yes, please. Start off
cool.
for me.
So my self-love recommendation this week is try as hard as you can to practice productive communication. I, at least, found that I got into the most trouble when I was younger, it's like you were saying earlier, like wanting to show all your research. I would get into, arguments with people or just discussions and get into sort of like the and another thing kind of mode. And especially in disagreements with loved ones, it can be so damaging to not be careful with your words just because you're upset. And the lady love portion of this is don't be afraid to advocate for that from other people, even mid-argument. Like I had a disagreement with a friend last week and I had to sort of stop her in the middle of our discussion to say, I understand where you're coming from and I want to hear what you're feeling, but I also want to ask you to try to only say things that are going to be productive to resolving this thing. Because I am not currently in a space where I can hear a whole lot more emotionally or, anything like that. So like, I just want to do a real quick check and encourage both of us to really think about what we're saying. And if it's something that you need to process out loud, period, maybe you can process it with someone else and then come back to me with the productive part of it. And it was really hard to do because I don't want my friends to censor themselves, but at the same time, I think it can become such a slippery slope.
See, I'm the person that would probably be on the other side of that conversation.
Really?
So it's probably good for me to keep in mind.
Okay. I like that.
No, because I am one of those people who's super analytical and who enjoys teasing through different arguments and potential outcomes just for the fun of it. Like that's fun to me to argue politics or something. And it's not, I don't take it like personally so much. And then I have to remember that not everybody is that way, and some people don't enjoy it or just don't have time for it at
and I'm very similar in an intellectual conversation. But if it's a disagreement, I really think that a lot of people should be a little bit more careful. And because it will only help. Right? There's like not a downside. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I think that's very mature. That's very wise. And wisdom is always something that I can use. Oh dear. Okay, so that's gonna be like yours is really deep.
Oh, sometimes it's thinking that like charcoal face mask. So it's fine.
I haven't tried that one either.
It just happens to be what happened this week. That's all.
Okay. Well, that's great. What happened this week? You know what? What happened the last week? We had, like I said, this huge party at our house, and it was hosted by variety of people, not just us, because it was a retirement party for one of my husband's coworkers. And so it was a group effort in the hosting. And they decided to hire a bartender, but the bartender did not come on time. So I got to play bartender for a little while and actually got to learn how to make some new mixed drinks, which was kind of fun for me. Ooh. And I think that now I might recommend, learn to make a new cocktail if you are a drinking sort. If you're not, make a virgin one, a non-alcoholic one. Yeah, exactly. Because it's just fun, kind of a fun party trick to have up your sleeve.
Ooh, I like that.
Last week, I did not know how to make a tequila sunrise, and now I do.
Get it? Yeah, get that grenadine into your life, right?
Right, exactly. And it was fun. Even had the shaker and the ice, and it was a lot of fun.
That's great. And, a lemon rind usually, it never hurts. A citrus rind of some sort.
No, right? Have a lot of limes on hand. And, it was a lot of fun, So anyway, there you go. Learn something new, but, don't make it something boring. Learn a cocktail. You can feel like you're enriching your life and you're broadening your scope of knowledge, but you're also having fun.
You're also getting a little drunk. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a way to relax as well.
All right. So I can't tell you how much I enjoyed the Governess Game. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm so glad that you did. Thank you for inviting me, for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. This was amazing. And then I've also pre-ordered How the Duke Stole Christmas. So I highly encourage everybody else to do the same because it just seems like a no-brainer.
It's fun, and it's a lot of book for your money, let me tell you. Yeah. So there's 4 novellas, and mine, I write short kind of in general. So mine is it's about this, it makes sense. It's like my usual novella length, but
yeah,
some of the other members of our group do not normally write novellas, Sarah. So their novellas are like
books, like novels.
Yeah, exactly, which is amazing. It's great. They're all making me look like total slouches. But let me tell you, you are going to get story for your bang for your reader buck or time if you get it from a library or something else. I mean, it is worth the investment.
Yeah, and great stories. October 15th too, so that's really exciting. Yes. You can either have it and save it, or get into the Christmas spirit a little bit early without Mariah Carey on the radio.
Very true.
All those things.
Very true. Although I do love that song.
Yes, but it usually starts on November 15th, and then we don't stop hearing it ever.
But there are worse ones. You want to know what's your least favorite Christmas? Is it the Mariah Carey one?
No, it's not.
What's the one you cringe every
Baby,
time?
It's Cold Outside.
Ooh. Oh, because it's kind of date rapey?
It's so rapey.
Things are ruined now, aren't they? In retrospect?
Yeah, they really are.
It's like the old school romance, It's like the bodice ripper of Christmas carols.
It is.
Christmas songs. Good question.
What's yours?
Simply having a wonderful Christmas time. Is that the whole title of it? God, I hate that. It's like the bells, and it's so repetitive, and that it's like I feel like I have a cheese grater on my brain. Like it just drives me up a wall.
Oh, I dig it. All right. Well, we can pull out the Dukes Who Stole Christmas when that happens and just write it out.
Neither of those songs is in there.
Yeah.
But there may be some Christmas carols.
How wonderful. Okay, and is there any social media you want to direct people to?
If you want to see things about my just general announcements about books and writing, then definitely join my Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Tessa Dare author, all one word. I have a reader group which can be accessed from that page, which it's closed group, so you have to ask to join and fill out like a tiny, just prove you're not some random person, an actual reader. And it's called the Secret Society of Damsels Who Dare, and we're having a lot of fun in that group. And I actually I talk a little bit more in that group. Still not about politics, but
about
things. And then if you want to know like all my views on everything and way too much about me, follow me on Twitter, which is at Tessa Dare, all one word. I have an Instagram account. Quite honestly, I don't even know the password. My assistant posts something there every once in a while, and that is Tessa_Dare. Although it is kind of like a New Year's or mid-year's resolution of mine to actually learn the password and possibly post a few more things there. So we'll see.
I feel like we all have our own platform, though, because Twitter is not my platform.
Right.
Like, it's just not. I do it for the podcast, and I have a personal Twitter, but it's just never probably going to happen.
What's your favorite?
Instagram is my favorite just because it's like visually interesting as well. And then I like the Facebook group that we have. I basically only go on Facebook anymore for our geriatric friendship cult. Because that's the name of our group.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And that's probably my favorite platform just because of the group. But Twitter is so overwhelming for me, and I find that it's so fast-paced that I can't follow anything. So it's hard.
That's a little tricky. Yeah. I'm a little behind on it right now. I haven't been on it much in the last week or so.
And that is an eternity in Twitter time.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
But like, if I need to know if I just felt an earthquake or if there was something else going on, or if it's just my imagination, I hop on Twitter and I know instantly.
Yep.
Oh, it was an earthquake, or whatever the case may be. Or, I like to look at the trends, and that's how I get a lot of my news.
Oh, I dig it. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you so much for being here with us.
It was great.
Yeah, it was so nice to talk to you.
I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah.
Thank you to all your many readers who sent in questions. That was very nice.
Isn't it cool? Yeah, and they love you. So this was such a huge thing for them to find out we were doing.
I love you all too. I am cool. Very, very grateful for people who follow authors and follow me and will, order the books in advance and talk to friends about them, because that is really how we get to have a job. And I like having a job, and I like having this job. So thank you very, very, very much.
Yay. Well, all right. So keep being a badass and love yourself as much as you love devilish bookshop rakes.
All right. It's a promise. Well said.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Hey, you. Yes, listener, you. Are you loving the show? If so, please leave a rating and review in your podcast app. The 90 seconds you take to say something nice not only helps new people find the show, but it makes me super smile over at HBHQ. Also, I've had a few people ask, and the answer is yes. We are still doing the 5-star bribe. If you leave us a review with 5 stars, then we'll do whatever book you want. We're real deep into the list, though, so it might be a while. Lilas! Okay, back to the show.